He was killed in a brutally violent fashion. If they would go after a federal judge like that, nobody was off limits.
It's one thing to see crime scene tape. It's another to see where a man's physical being has been blown away.
This is a thinking person who has a lot of different angles, utilizing other people to achieve his purpose. He probably has been thinking about this a long time.
4 bombs in 4 days, we certainly felt we had a serial bomber. And we didn't know how many other bombs were out there in the mail.
It's a quiet afternoon in the exclusive suburb of Mountain Brook, Alabama, and federal judge Robert Vance is enjoying the day with his wife of 34 years, Helen. The judge has several offices in the area, but once a month he travels to Atlanta or Montgomery, where he serves on the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals.
My father was well regarded as a judge. He had a larger-than-life type personality.
Over the years, the judge's larger-than-life personality has won him more than his share of friends and admirers. So with less than 2 weeks to go till Christmas, the Vance's mailbox is literally crammed full with cards and packages.
Judge Vance apparently thinks one of them is from a friend of his, a judge on the 11th Circuit, who's sending him some horse magazines.
Judge Vance was killed almost instantly. His wife, Helen, was sitting across the table from him when the bomb went off, and she was quite seriously injured.
Mrs. Vance, amazingly, had one nail that entered her body and lodged, I believe, near her back.
Despite her injuries, Helen remains conscious and manages to dial 911. But there's a problem. The blast has left her temporarily deaf.
So she got in her van and drove to the neighbor's house, which was a couple hundred yards away, and drove up to that house and started blowing the horn. They called 911, and the ambulance came and took her to the hospital.
The victim's son, attorney Robert Vance Jr., is in New York on business when a family friend calls with the news.
He started off by saying, "Your mom's fine. She's in the hospital now." And then I asked about my dad, and he said, he's gone. So that's how I found out about it, and it was quite a shock.
Back in Birmingham, Mountain Brook police are joined by investigators from the FBI, ATF, U.S. Marshals, and U.S. Postal Service. The victim's body has been removed, but the room is still peppered with flesh, blood, and shrapnel. A quaint southern kitchen transformed into a war zone.
There was semblance of bloodshed on the floor. It was very clear that there was some very serious damage done to a human being.
Here. Judge Vance had been sitting here with Miss Vance across the table. He looked at the box, and as soon as he opened it, he was blown back with all the way over to this wall.
Well, the things that came to my mind that just outraged me the most was he was killed in a brutally violent fashion. And this man's blown to smithereens in his own house right in front of his wife. There's nothing this guy could have done that warranted what just happened to him.
From hundreds of tiny fragments, explosives experts begin the painstaking task of reconstructing the killer's handiwork.
It's like putting a puzzle together. You had pieces of pipe, you had pieces of wire, you had intact nails, you had paper, you had rubber bands, you had the postage stamps that were on the package. All these things had to be collected, carefully tagged, and then they were sent to Washington to the FBI lab for examination.
My purpose is to find out what the device was and furnish that information to the field investigators to assist them in trying to determine the person or persons responsible for putting that device together and causing it to explode.
As the forensic analysis gets underway, investigators start hunting for a motive.
Your mind is going in 2 or 3 different directions. You know, was it a personal vendetta by a neighbor or a relative or a business associate? Or was it someone who didn't like his verdict in the courtroom or what he represented or his politics? All of these things come into play.
They were going through every case my dad ever decided and seeing who was involved in every case. It was a massive undertaking.
During his 12 years on the bench, Vance had ruled against Colombian drug lords, the Aryan Brotherhood, and the Ku Klux Klan. And in his earlier career as the head of Alabama's Democratic Party, he'd battled against militant segregationists, earning him a number of death threats.
Well, if they would go after a federal judge like that, nobody was off limits. It was unthinkable. Now, the whole criminal justice system would break down if you murder judges. I mean, that's like something that would happen in Bogota, not Birmingham, Alabama.
It's trying to interpret the motivation for assassinating a federal judge. You're trying to determine, was this person targeted because of who he was and what he did, or what he represented to other people?
A racial motive also seems like a strong possibility. Birmingham has a violent civil rights history, from attacks on protesters to the bombing deaths of 4 little girls at the 16th Street Baptist Church.
Naturally, white supremacist type groups were among the early suspicions.
But given the specific nature of the attack, the FBI behavioral experts take the profile a step further.
A bomber chooses his weapon because he wants to make certain that somebody is going to die, but he doesn't want to be there to see it. He didn't leave the bomb in the mailbox. He let the postal authorities do it. So for him, the inference then for us was that his ego trip was beyond killing a federal judge. It was making an employee of the federal government the mailman and accessory to the crime. So we looked at that as part of his makeup, that he's the kind of person that likes to laugh at the government and feels that he can outsmart us on all levels.
But this analysis only adds to investigators' growing concerns. Was Vance simply an isolated target, or could this be just the beginning of something far more menacing?
It was a weekend, and our concern initially was what's going to happen on Monday morning. Are there others?
"24 hours after the murder of Judge Robert Vance, the man behind the bombing is still in the shadows. But an army of law enforcement agents will stop at nothing to bring him to light."
Now, I hadn't been on the job even 3 years yet, but I really wanted to be out there. I wanted to say, pick me. I want to work with you on this case.
When you kill a federal judge, then it gets the full attention of the FBI, the other federal law enforcement agencies, and it gets a lot of media attention. And there's a lot of pressure to find out who did this.
Monday, a court security officer is reviewing packages moving along a conveyor belt on the X-ray machine when he spots what appears to be the profile of a pipe bomb inside a package.
This time, the device is delivered directly to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals in Atlanta, the same court where Judge Vance presided.
The bomb squad there in Atlanta rendered the bomb safe and without totally destroying it. And we were able to recover almost intact a bomb.
And when the Atlanta package seems to match the one sent to the judge's home, concerns within the investigative team go through the roof.
Well, we had Judge Vance's bomb on Saturday. We had the 11th Circuit Court bomb on Monday morning. No one knew what to expect next. It was anyone's guess.
In an effort to cast a wider net, a joint task force is quickly formed between law enforcement agencies in both cities.
The FBI was the lead agency in the investigation, but we were really needing more help from other agencies, and especially expertise from the alcohol, tobacco, firearms with bombings, with the postal inspectors, with the delivery of a package in the mail, with the U.S. Marshals, who were going to be responsible for protecting all the judges.
The 11th Circuit connection is impossible to ignore, and right away, investigators intensify their search for individuals who may have had a beef with the court. But in Jacksonville, Florida, there's little reason to be suspicious of the mail coming into the local NAACP office.
Yes.
3 hours after the bomb is intercepted in Atlanta, Jacksonville chapter president Willie Dennis receives a package. But she's late for an appointment and doesn't get a chance to open it. At around the same time, a similar package arrives at the law office of Savannah NAACP attorney Robert Edward Robinson.
It's a horrific scene, and the windows are blown out. His desk is blown basically in two. It is spattered with gore. The pale blue walls in his office have nails in them, and I will never forget it. I think probably the impact it had on the public was to convey, in a very important way, the horror of what this bomber has done. You know, it's one thing to see crime scene tape. It's another to see where a man's physical being has been blown away.
My son told me that his Aunt Vivian from Savannah had called and wanted to know, did I hear anything about the explosion? And I said, what explosion? He said, that's all she said. I called my mom. And when she picked up the phone, I knew something was wrong because she was screaming. And she said that it had been an explosion at Robbie's office. And she didn't know what was going on. I just more or less grabbed my purse and got in the car, me and my sons, to go there.
Barely clinging to life, Robert Robinson is rushed to the hospital where a team of 7 surgeons work desperately to save his life. But after a valiant struggle, they lose the battle. In the meantime, Robinson's sister Barbara and her sons are racing to Savannah from their home in Augusta, Georgia, 2.5 hours away.
This was very, very painful because when we were on the road, before we got to Savannah, they announced it on the radio. And that really almost caused me to have a wreck. The kids didn't know what to do because I just stopped the car and got out of the car and just started running down the highway. I don't know why, I just jumped out of the car.
The third bomb in 3 days throws the investigators for another loop. Now agents wonder, could there be a connection between the 11th Circuit Court and the NAACP? A case involving the well-known advocacy group that simply set someone off. With tensions skyrocketing, federal agencies and NAACP chapters across the country brace for the worst.
It did feel like we were under attack. You know, nobody knew when the next one was going to show up or anything. So pretty much the whole office was working this investigation.
The next morning in Jacksonville, Florida, NAACP chapter president Willie Dennis hears about the latest bombing.
Yes, I know. I'm on my way.
Something clicks. Something comes together. She calls a contact at the sheriff's office, who in turn calls a bomb technician.
After 24 very tense hours, the bomb is rendered safe. As analysts search the device for any obvious trace evidence, FBI profilers use the latest information to help get a bead on the bomber's motives.
He didn't know for certain that Mr. Robinson would open that bomb. He sent it to him at his office. In doing that, someone else could have opened his mail. He didn't care who did it. Somebody at that office was going to die. And the other two bombs that he sent to the NAACP in the 11th Circuit, those were message bombs. They were diversion bombs. And he didn't care who died there. That was an institutional diversion, not a personal assault. It's told us that this is not a run-of-the-mill, somebody is just sending a bomb out. This is a thinking person who has a lot of different angles. His thought process is involving embarrassing or utilizing other people to achieve his purpose. He probably has been thinking about this a long time and fantasizing it and planning it, and he's done research, and his fruits of his labor he couldn't wait to see on the 11 o'clock news.
4 bombs in 4 days, we certainly felt we had a serial bomber. And we didn't know how many other bombs were out there in the mail.
The Hazardous Devices School, or HDS, is an FBI U.S. Army facility located in Huntsville, Alabama. More than 2,000 bomb technicians are trained and certified there. It is the only institution of its kind in the United States. The week before Christmas, 1989, law enforcement agencies across the Southeast are on high alert after 4 bombs are delivered to unsuspecting recipients in as many days. A federal judge and a civil rights attorney are already dead, and so far, federal agents are no closer to solving the case.
Naturally, when you have 2 bombs going to the courts or to a judge, and then 2 bombs going to an NAACP lawyer in the NAACP office in Jacksonville, the conjecture was this is a hate crime. This is someone who's mad at the courts and mad at black people, the NAACP.
We don't know what the motive is, so the field of suspects is huge. And one of the worst mistakes you can make in a big investigation is narrowing the focus too soon.
The task force quickly sets up a hotline and begins fielding hundreds of calls.
There were calls from psychics who wanted to help in the investigation. There were calls from wives who were divorced from their husbands and thought this is exactly the kind of thing he would do. There were calls coming in even from jail, from people who said, hey, my cellmate last year said that when he got out, he was going to kill a federal judge. Just a wide variety of calls and information, and it was really, we were drowning in information.
And with each passing hour, the pressure only intensifies. Until law enforcement can close in on a culprit, no one is safe.
We couldn't save the judge. We couldn't save Mr. Robinson. Their fate rested with a higher authority. But there were other potential victims out there, and we knew that. And we had to do all that we could to try to stop this person from killing again.
In the lab, technicians scrutinize every component of the recovered devices. In each, the bomber was careful to paint the inside of the package black to obscure any fingerprints.
I'd never seen a device specifically like this before. All 4 devices were essentially identical to each other. The bomb that killed Judge Vance was more of what I call a traditional pipe bomb, where it had end caps that were screwed on. The other 3 devices were lengths of pipe with end plates that were welded on. That made me feel very, very comfortable to say, hey, this was built not by persons, plural, but by a singular person.
A threaded rod had been run through the end plates on the end of these pipe bombs, apparently just to delay by, I guess, milliseconds, the instant of explosion, because the more that explosion is delayed, the more force that builds up. Very risky for the bomber, because, you know, friction from turning that threaded rod with the powder inside, the welding that he did to affix the pipe together, could have had disastrous consequences for him.
The bomb's design can also provide investigators with valuable clues into what makes the bomber himself tick.
The bomb maker was a very detail-oriented person who would take a lot of time and effort to make the bombs, who would probably test different components of the bombs before he actually put them into use, and who had the money and resources to accomplish all this.
It would be a lone white male, age 45 to 53. We were extremely impressed with his overall patience demonstrated in preparing the bombs that would indicate that he would be at least middle age. He would be capable of being a college student. If not, he was self-taught, obviously well-read, even if he hadn't attended college. He's probably obsessive-compulsive, very neat.
But as meticulous as this bomber may seem to be, he didn't cover his tracks completely. Investigators soon discover an odd defect in the bomb's mailing labels. The number 1 has an unusual flag-shaped mark at the top.
We decided to go through the records in Atlanta of people who Judge Vance had been on the panel to hear the appeal, and see if there was anyone in that group that might be a likely suspect, especially someone that had an unfavorable ruling.
With the clock ticking, Bureau agents pour over thousands of pages of documents looking for a telltale number 1.
Everybody was on pins and needles, especially the judges.
And rightfully so. Judge Lanier Anderson in Macon, Georgia, gets an ominous letter filled with anti-government threats from a fictitious group called Americans for a Competent Federal Judicial System. Now, investigators are beginning to suspect that the bomber isn't as interested in race relations as he is in outsmarting the feds.
In other words, there's a chess game going on here. The public and the investigators are on one side of the board, and our bomber's on the other side, and that board is made up of the media. And he's making his move, we're making our move. So if we say something which he's going to perceive to be challenging, more bombs are going to fly. And that's why we carefully orchestrated press releases from then on, because we knew he would relate to what we were saying, and it may cause him to send more bombs, and we did not want to see that.
As the profilers continue to work every angle, FBI agents' efforts in the field finally pay off when the task force makes a pivotal discovery.
There's a typewriter match made between one of the threat letters and a pro se document, a court filing done without a lawyer at the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, where Judge Vance sat and where one of the bombs had been sent.
Just weeks after the bombings that kill a federal judge and a civil rights attorney, the FBI, believing a manual typewriter holds the key to the mystery, closes in on an Alabama junk dealer named Robert Wayne O'Farrell.
It was determined that the typewriter that was used on the address labels and some of the threat letters had in fact been in O'Farrell's possession.
Adding to investigators' suspicions is the discovery that O'Farrell has a well-documented beef with the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. Just 2 years earlier, he'd failed in an attempt to collect benefits from his former job at an insurance company and sued for damages. Without the help of an attorney, he filed an angry appeal, only to have Judge Vance in the 11th Circuit Court throw the case out.
This certainly appeared to be a very big break in the case, to have a typewriter used by someone who had an appeal before the 11th Circuit that had been rejected only 16 months before the bombs were sent out.
With this new finding in hand, investigators waste little time ordering round-the-clock surveillance on O'Farrell.
An army of federal agents descends on Enterprise. An army of reporters descends on Enterprise, Alabama. The focus of the nation and the focus of federal law enforcement is on Enterprise, Alabama.
With snipers and medics standing by, FBI agents intercept O'Farrell at his junk shop, braced for anything. But the suspect is calm and collected.
He said he had heard about the bombing on the television, and his wife talked about how terrible it was. And when I told him that this was the judge that had heard his case and had turned him down in Atlanta, he said he wasn't aware of that.
Investigators soon take another tack and try to rattle O'Farrell by showing him their surveillance photos of him.
He looked at the picture and looked at another picture and looked at all the pictures. And after about 30 seconds, he looked up at me and said, "Y'all been following me?" I said, "Yes, we have." He said, "That's interesting," but didn't seem to faze him at all.
Inside the shop, agents search for components similar to those used in the construction of the bombs. They're also on the hunt for the manual typewriter. But as investigators continue their search, an unrelated and subtle detail catches their eye.
One of the first things that came to my attention was the way his shelves were put together, and I asked him who did his carpentry work, and he proudly stated that he did.
The shelves, honestly, a number of them were about ready to fall down. I can't, at that point, imagine someone building the shelves like that being the same person who had built the bombs. There was too much in the devices, too much planning had gone into the construction of those devices, and the handiwork was at a higher level that was in the bombs than what I saw in the shelves.
If the person that built these shelves tried to put the bomb together, we wouldn't be talking to him right now. He would have blown himself up.
Still, the suspect's questionable shelf-building skills aren't enough for the Bureau to let O'Farrell off the hook.
That typewriter match was viewed like a fingerprint, a match.
There was speculation that it was thrown into a lake. There was a lot of lake draggings and searching for that typewriter, but it was never located.
Picture federal agents going into Wayne O'Farrell's septic tank, and you have an idea of the thoroughness with which they scrutinized his life.
As investigators turn up the heat on O'Farrell, he opts to take a polygraph test, hoping to get them off his back. But the tactic backfires when he fails.
The polygraph coming back deceptive was very troublesome. If he had passed the polygraph, then we could sort of move on. But then there's something there that we needed to find out that he was not telling us, something he was holding back.
While agents in Alabama continue to grapple with questions surrounding O'Farrell, over 200 miles away, the ATF is already working a developing lead.
There's this monthly meeting of people who deal with bombs for a living in Metro Atlanta. Bomb techs, lab folks. It's happening at a steakhouse in Gwinnett County soon after these bombs have been discovered, same week. Somebody passes around an X-ray of the 11th Circuit bomb. Veteran ATF lab guy named Lloyd Irwin takes a look at this X-ray. and he recognizes a signature. And he says something along the lines of, I've only ever seen one bomber use that signature. Lloyd Irwin took a retirement announcement, flipped it over, drew an amazingly accurate sketch on the spot of that early 70s bomb. To a layperson, it's a much different bomb. Less powerful, different materials. But to a bomb guy like Irwin, there's a signature.
If you fish a lot, and, you catch one strange fish you've never seen before, and maybe you go 20 years before you ever catch another. Oh, I remember that. I caught one like that 20 years ago. So it's easy.
And the name of the fish was Walter Leroy Moody.
Moody went from one of the 20 names that a chemist remembers from 20 years ago that's got to stay on the list. Moody, at least with ATF, and with me and the case agent, Moody went high on the hit parade. We were in an agreement with the FBI that they would continue to pursue other avenues and persons of interest, but we were locking on Moody. And that was fine because, it ain't over till it's over.
Delving into Moody's records, federal agents learned that back in 1971, he'd had a car repossessed. Outraged, Moody constructed a special delivery for the car dealer, whom he blamed for the ordeal. But Moody's first wife accidentally got in the way of his plans.
She had found it and proceeded to open it. And when she opened it, it blew up and injured her pretty badly.
Lucky she wasn't killed, she was maimed.
Ultimately, Moody was convicted of possessing a pipe bomb and served 3 years in prison. But his subsequent appeal to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals was rejected.
What were the odds that this guy built a package bomb previously in Macon, Georgia, and had a beef with the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals? As far as I'm concerned, he's the guy.
Nevertheless, there's little evidence to suggest Moody had ever been involved in any racist activity. So why target the NAACP? It's a definite question mark. But once ATF examiners determined that the 1989 bombs are nearly identical to the bomb that went off in 1972, they immediately put a tail on Moody.
It and the 72 device were unique. The only two that I ever seen that used bolts with square plates. Even though there were still some differences, but they were kind of improvements made from the other one. As far as pipes, regular pipe bombs, I just never seen one anybody went to that much trouble to put a pipe together when he could have made it in a tenth of the time, by just buying the ready-made materials.
There were elements of those bombs that I never saw in my entire ATF career. The way he made them work with each other was superior in every way. It was genius. It was madness.
Investigators are now more concerned than ever. If Moody is the man they're looking for, there's no telling how many devices could be out there. But with little in the way of solid evidence, the team finds itself at another standstill.
If this guy is the bomber, we want to make sure he doesn't send other bombs. And so we wanted to make sure he wasn't dropping packages off at post offices.
After a number of false leads and a series of deadly bombings, federal agents from the FBI and ATF focus in on a con artist from the Atlanta area named Walter Leroy Moody.
With the ATF expertise and bringing in the FBI experts to look at their case, we all came to the same conclusion that Mr. O'Farrell may or may not be involved in this case, but Mr. Moody was definitely our #1 suspect.
Moody's behavior also seems a perfect match to the FBI profile.
He had his day choreographed. He got up at the same time. He went out at the same time. He ate at the same Waffle House every morning. He went to the same place every day. He was just very rigid.
I followed him to a hotel off I-75 between Atlanta and Macon, and he went to a payphone. He called an attorney and told the attorney, I'm being followed by the feds. And I think it's because they think I killed that federal judge and sent that bomb in the mail. How in the hell does this guy know he's being followed and it's feds, and it has anything to do with the judge being killed by a mail bomb?
As the circumstantial evidence mounts against him, agents obtain a search warrant and raid Moody's home.
Moody's reaction was cool. He didn't want to talk. He wanted to talk to his lawyer, but he was confident that there would be nothing found in his house to connect him to the bombing, and he was right.
Most bomb makers leave behind some microscopic traces of their crimes, but when investigators inspect Moody's workroom, it's bare and immaculate.
Everything was clean and neat. Everything had its place and a place for everything. It had been freshly painted. There was new carpet on the floor. And in fact, the plywood flooring had been cut out, removed, and replaced. And so what they found was a sterile room in Moody's house. It was very frustrating to not find the evidence we were expecting. But on the other hand, this is what convinced me that we had the right guy.
Bombers are very meticulous people. If they're not, they kill themselves. In their persona to other people, they sometimes come across as almost effeminate, not in a homosexual way necessarily, but because they are just so neat about their hair, their dress, more like women than men. And that reflects in their bomb making, that reflects in their lifestyle. So Mr. Moody, if you looked at his appearance, it was impeccable most of the time, never a hair out of place.
But without any hard evidence, it will be impossible to make a case, especially with O'Farrell still number 2 on the suspect list.
If we bring Moody to trial, part of his defense is, I didn't do it. I didn't even have the typewriter. You never found the typewriter in my house. You never found anything else that I typed on that typewriter. It must be the junk dealer in Alabama. But finally a break came. There was information developed that the junk dealer's wife may have sold the manual typewriter to Walter Leroy Moody's wife, Susan, some months prior to the bombing.
It seems like an impossible coincidence. 2 former defendants, both with beefs against the 11th Circuit Court, inadvertently connected through an old manual typewriter. But in a lineup, O'Farrell's wife is able to identify Susan as the person who she believes bought one of their used machines. And under subsequent FBI questioning, Moody's wife cracks, admitting that she also bought a number of the items used to make the bombs.
Susan Moody had been the person Roy Moody sent out to gather the components from around the Southeast. Susan Moody was able to take investigators to the places where these components had come from. She was able to help them piece together this mosaic.
Susan Moody worshiped Moody and did his bidding. Whatever it was, she would follow and do whatever he told her. She didn't seem to have a mind of her own anymore, you know? She was his robot.
With Susan Moody's information in hand, the feds concede that Robert Wayne O'Farrell had absolutely no involvement in the bombings or the threat letters and officially dismiss him as a suspect.
We had an outstanding investigative team that made things terribly uncomfortable for Mr. O'Farrell, but proved that he was innocent. And it's difficult for him to accept. But I hope someday that he sees that we were just doing our job and will understand it.
A short time later, Walter Leroy Moody is indicted for the murders of Judge Robert Vance in Birmingham and attorney Robert Robinson in Savannah.
It was a good feeling that he's off the street.
Investigators theorize that Moody sent the Atlanta, Savannah, and Florida bombs as diversions meant to throw authorities off his trail. But the case is still far from ironclad. Moody has no history of racist activity, and questions remain concerning a motive in the NAACP bombings. To keep him off the street, the FBI comes up with a plan to see if their suspect will actually succeed in incriminating himself.
The investigators shared with us that he was known to talk to himself. And we were asked, is it possible that someone like him might confess something to himself? In this situation, I strongly urged that if they could get Title III approval to bug his cell, that it may well work in our benefit. And it did. And we were able to capture some information that he said that was incriminating.
In the recordings, Moody admits to killing 2 people, but justifies his actions.
Bombers, they are convinced that they are brighter than we are. They're brighter than victims, they're brighter than the system, they think things out, they fantasize about them, and bombers will rationalize that. It's not my fault he opened that package. You know, I didn't give them to him, the mailman did. It's the mailman's fault.
This guy was a revenge nut. He wanted to go to law school. He fancied himself the smartest man on the planet. And he could probably go to a law school, but he could never be admitted to the bar because of his 1972 conviction for the bomb in Macon, Georgia. So 19 years later, he is still consumed with proving he didn't do that and having his conviction overturned. And he's getting nowhere.
Now Moody is facing another possible conviction, and this time, the charge is murder. The trial kicks off in June 1991, but given the unusually high degree of publicity, the venue is changed to St. Paul, Minnesota.
I saw Walter Moody for the first time in his trial, and he never showed any emotion. I remember he had a writing pad in front of him, and he would just spend his time writing on his pad. He would just sit there without any sign of remorse, just that fact alone, that he could not show any emotion under such circumstances was very telling to me.
Walter Moody killed more than my brother. I looked at him and I said, this man has just ruined our whole family. And I wanted to choke him for my brother and for my mother, for his children, and for all the grandchildren he wouldn't be able to see.
On June 28th, after 3 weeks of testimony and 13 hours of deliberation, the jury finds Walter Leroy Moody guilty of 71 federal charges. He receives 7 life sentences.
I came away from the trial convinced that Walter Moody was a very bright man, but a complete psychopath, without any regard for any other person. He was interested only in himself. And if he had some sort of grievance or grudge, then he would do what it takes to address that, without regard to how it might affect other people.
Investigators now believe that the NAACP bomb targets were innocent victims who Moody simply used in a twisted plan to exact revenge on the 11th Circuit Court.
Vance is apparently the only person he was settling a score with. And it all had to do with his obsession with lying his way out of his 1972 conviction for being a bomber.
5 years later, Moody is tried in Alabama State Court for the murder of Judge Robert Vance and sentenced to death. He is currently on death row at the Holman Correctional Facility in Atmore, Alabama.
I think Lloyd Irwin really cracked the case. That his memory of what had happened back in 1972 was the key in focusing the investigation where it should be on Walter Leroy Moody.
Moody will never be free to walk on this earth outside a U.S. penitentiary from that conviction to the day he died. I believe that Walter Moody is one of the most dangerous people that I ever encountered. He is locked up and it's over.